Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and welcome to RegWatch by regulatorwatch.com. And I'm here with David Sweanor, adjunct professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa and tobacco control policy expert. David, how are you?
Good to be with you, Brent.
So we just finished shooting an episode for the Global Forum on nicotine, and I wanted to just catch you for a quick 10 minutes or so here to talk about Canada. Because, we lost Quebec to a flavor ban. Thousands and thousands of vapors there have had their access and choice curtailed, or they're buying now on an illicit market. You've got, of course, tons of companies that are born and bred in Quebec that, have gone out of business. Let's start with the flavor ban in Quebec, and let's expand out to what else is going on in Canada. What are your thoughts on that flavor ban?
I mean, the goal is you want to kill people while denying them their rights. I mean, it's a brilliant strategy. But how we got into this is just phenomenal, where we've got people who claim they're with health groups or claim some affiliation with some sort of physician group while doing things that, are completely antithetical to the principles of public health. Denying the science, not understanding why people are doing something, not meeting them where they are, not empowering them to make better decisions, actually trying to prevent them from doing things like that. So I think it's a travesty, but I think it goes in a long line of measures that governments have engaged in, whether it's bans on women's reproductive rights, bans on information about contraception, bans on alcohol, the war on drugs. We've seen so many of these things that are just disasters, and we keep having them revisited. And it concerns me not just that we're doing this, but that governments, government health departments, and health organizations, medical organizations, have often supported these things. And this is critically important because when public health itself plays a huge role in the well-being of people. We can forget about the impact of doctors and hospitals if we just focus on basic public health things. What can we do on public health things? It just dwarfs what we can do with tertiary care medicine. But public health depends on the trust of the public. So when a medical officer of health or a Canadian Cancer Society or somebody says, here's advice that you should follow, you want people to say, oh, all right. But when they've shot their credibility, and we've seen this in surveys, including by the Wellcome Trust, global surveys about the level of trust in government health information or the level of trust in health authorities, and it has declined markedly. And that's what we saw in many of the problems we did during COVID, and they were aggravated during COVID by some of those health groups. The people weren't doing the things that would have protected them because they didn't trust the source of information. And as Peter Sandman, one of the world's leading experts on risk communication, has said in a wonderful blog about noble lies, why do health bodies lie to the public? Because they think it's okay to lie to you, to try to force you to change your behavior in a way that they think is good for you. But the problem is, these people have never read The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Once somebody knows that you've lied to them, you've misled them, they don't trust you, especially after you've done it a couple of times. Again, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. And you destroy your credibility not just on that topic. You destroy it, on anything. So if I outright lie to you about something to do with vaping, and then I say the same thing about nicotine pouches, and then I talk to you about immunizing your children, you're going to say Sweanor already lies. Why would I trust him? And so it's a huge cost to public health to have its credibility destroyed. But in this case, it isn't like conspiracy theorist bloggers who are causing the lack of trust. As Peter Sandman has written, that public health people often ask me, why don't people trust us? And as he says, the real question should be, why aren't we trustworthy?
Let me show you this, David. This was sent out and signed by a bunch of leading health groups, and this is February 19th of 2024. Health groups call on federal government to deliver on its commitment to protect kids against nicotine addiction. So this is now 6 months or so, after really the big win in Quebec. And leading health organizations concerned about the health and well-being of youth in Canada have united to publish a full-page ad today in the Hill Times to draw Ottawa lawmakers' attention to the urgent need to intervene to protect minors against nicotine addiction. The ad is signed by Action on Smoking and Health, the Canadian Cancer Society, the Canadian Lung Association, the Quebec Coalition for Tobacco Control, Heart and Stroke, and Physicians for a Smoke-Free Canada. They call on the federal government to ban flavors in vaping products, including mint and menthol. Tobacco flavor would be the only flavor that they would allow. What do you think of that?
I'd probably have more respect for them if they accepted a big payment from cigarette companies to put out that sort of nonsense. But cigarette companies don't have to pay them to protect the cigarette business. They do it for free because that's what they're doing. They know full well that flavors are used by a vast majority of adults who are getting off cigarettes. And they know full well that the harm to kids, and when they say kids, they really mean young adults or teens, but kids is more emotional. The real harm to them isn't from vaping. The vaping rates among young people have fallen dramatically. And if you look at regular vaping, like people who are vaping every day, it's very rare to find that among people who wouldn't otherwise be smoking cigarettes. And this has been a huge advantage, not a loss, a big advantage for young people. But what's the cost to these people, to the young people they claim they're trying to protect? When those young people have a parent or a grandparent, a coach, a teacher, any other significant adult in their life who gets sick because of their smoking, and they're smoking because they couldn't get off smoking. They couldn't get off smoking because these groups have foreclosed the off-ramp, the products that could have worked for them. They're banning the products. They're misinforming people on an ongoing basis about relative risk. And Brent, all you need to do, and what these groups should do if they have any curiosity, is when you meet somebody who's smoking a cigarette, ask them why they're not vaping. Because they'll tell you. And they'll tell you because vaping's more hazardous. And whose fault is that? Was that the big cigarette companies who managed to convince them they ought to keep smoking? It's groups like this. I mean, and somehow they think that this is okay. Somehow they think it's all right to have, 48,000 Canadians dying every year from cigarette smoking, when we know full well what we could do to vastly reduce that, where we're seeing it happen worldwide with people moving to alternatives. And that they have to be consumer acceptable alternatives. You have to give consumers an offer they're willing to take. Flavors are a key part of that. So they're not health organizations. They're moralists. They're often some sort of ideological agenda. And I think it's doing tremendous harm. And the idea that they get away with sloganeering rather than an intelligent policy discussion, and that many of the groups on that list absolutely refuse to talk to anybody who would question their views. I mean, they act like there's some sort of cult or a conspiracy theory group than actual public health people.
And is it concerning that, say, Canadian Cancer Society, the Quebec Coalition for Tobacco Control, Heart and Stroke, Physicians for a Smoke-Free Canada, they're lobbying, actually pressuring Health Canada here to institute a nationwide flavor ban that has been on the books since 2021, but shelved because Health Canada knows better. But so these groups are pressuring Health Canada, and these groups are also supported financially in some cases by Health Canada.
Yeah, and the nature of putting together a coalition on a policy issue, and I've been involved with this many times over my career, is many of the groups that will put their name on it don't actually understand much about it. I'm sure that if you called your local lung association or Heart and Stroke Foundation and said you want to talk to somebody who's up to speed and really knows the science on vaping, you're not going to find anybody. But they're putting their names on something, and you've got groups that use names that make it sound like they're a big deal, like Physicians for a Smoke-Free Canada. Leave aside that they're not physicians and they're not supporting a smoke-free Canada. That I think it's up to Health Canada to look at this and say they know it's a very small group of quite evangelical, anti-nicotine people who are trying to shape this agenda. And they're making all this noise, but what they're doing is wrong. Should we not treat this in a way that achieves public health goals? Should we not be ensuring that politicians are aware that there's a lot of misinformation? Should we not be actually doing public health within Health Canada? Again, things like, let's look at the people who are using nicotine. Let's understand their lived experience. Let's meet them where they are. Let's empower them to make better decisions about their own health. That's how you do public health. When you're looking at the science, look at the idea of the Enlightenment. How do we use science and reason and humanism to improve the human condition? Are these groups doing it? No, they're not. Why can't we dismiss them? Why are they being listened to? Why are they not being countered? Why doesn't Health Canada say, if these groups want to take this position, how about we have an open debate? They can pick 2 or 3 people from their side. We'll allow other people from the science side to pick 2 or 3 people. We will have an open debate broadcast. Anybody in Canada can watch it. And this offer has been made by leading people in our long history of trying to reduce cigarette smoking. And these groups absolutely refuse to do that. There is no way they're going to get into a debate because they know they'll lose in the science. They know they'll lose on the logic because they're not doing something based on facts or reason or humanism. They're doing something because they want to dictate what other people do based on whatever moral views they happen to have. And so far, they've managed to delay the transition away from cigarette smoking quite a lot. But I think it's also worth noting they're not succeeding. So even in Quebec, people are finding ways to mix their own products. They're destroying the legal market, by and large, but the illicit market will simply replace that. Just as happened in other products and services where we try to ban something and consumers have an interest. So they're really just slowing the progress. And it would make much more sense for them to say, let's think about what we're actually trying to do here. Because those who think, and some of them do, that their goal is simply to eliminate any form of nicotine use, is about as viable as saying you're going to eliminate any sort of alcohol use. It's been tried. Or eliminate any sort of caffeine use, that's also been tried, that you're not going to succeed on that. You're going to have perhaps a huge underground and drug gangs and the sort of violence that's now associated with the vaping trade in Australia after they banned it. You're not going to stop it. So maybe we should focus on actually doing public health work instead. And maybe some of these organizations that are credible in other things they're doing should look at what's happening within their organizations on this field and say, maybe there's some people who should have an early retirement. Maybe there's some people who should go do something else because it's hurting the image of the organizations to be doing this.
David, explain for our viewers, if there is a good answer to it, why these health groups aren't simply calling on the government to ban combustible cigarette sales. Is there something in the Canadian Constitution or common law or civil law in Canada that prevents the government from banning combustible cigarettes altogether? And why aren't the health groups advocating for that?
Oh, I think they would support something like that, except that they know that that's completely untenable. It's not going to happen. For all sorts of reasons, including the millions of users and governments make billions of dollars. And we already have a ripping illicit market in cigarettes. But they come up with a lot of supply side theories about how we could force the industry to stop making as many cigarettes or stop making cigarettes, thinking that's going to make the problem go away. A lot of quite naive ideas about that. But I think the reason that they focus on the low risk products is the belief that, well, cigarettes, can discourage a lot of people from using nicotine already because it's going to kill them. So maybe people will quit if all they can do is if I want to prevent anybody from using caffeine, I'm going to think it's great if somebody's selling highly radioactive coffee because, that gives people a good reason to quit using caffeine. I'm going to get really upset about the coffee shops that are like, Starbucks, et cetera, that are selling stuff that isn't going to kill people. And I think that's what they're doing. They're going after the low risk products because to them, if their goal is abstinence on nicotine, the low risk products are a much bigger threat.
So, but to be clear, there's no real reason why Health Canada couldn't pass a regulation that banned the sale of combustible cigarettes.
Oh, I mean, we could. I mean, it wouldn't stop combustible cigarettes. We could pass a law saying it's illegal for water to flow downhill too, but it doesn't make much of a difference. Markets will meet consumer demand. We've seen that with the results of the war on drugs approach to narcotics. We saw it with the bans on giving contraceptive information to women. We've seen it on the bans on certain books because we decided that they were inappropriate. The whole history of banning alcohol. These things don't work, but yeah, a government could try it if they wanted. I just can't imagine, any government, once it actually looks at the policy options, would think that's a good idea.
I'd like to just be able to give, Canadian Cancer Society the hand and say, until you start, advocating for the banning of combustible tobacco, get the hell out of here when it comes to safer nicotine products.
Well, I think the thing that would actually move these groups, because it has in my history, I mean, these health groups were not big on helping us in doing things to reduce cigarette smoking through my career. They're much more interested in raising money to fund research or whatever else they're doing. Fundraising seems to be their goal. I'm surprised that we haven't seen something like, Vapors organizing to say, we are not going to make any donations to groups like the Canadian Cancer Society until they start telling the truth and start actually helping people move off cigarettes rather than protecting cigarettes by attacking the low-risk alternatives. Why would we do this? Why would we trust you? You're adding to cancer rates rather than reducing them. And I think if anybody organized something like that, the Canadian Cancer Society would change its views very quickly, because it's essentially a fundraising organization.
So figure out a way to target and influence the donors to the Canadian Cancer Society.
I think something like that would play a big role. And I could give war stories about that through my career, about what motivated health charities to get involved in doing things on trying to reduce cigarette smoking, or medical organizations. And it was usually some sort of vested interest. It wasn't an overall interest in public health and the well-being of their fellow human beings. It's a sad commentary, but they're motivated by other things.
What else can you say about Canada except for we're screwed?
No, again, it's doing really well. I mean, look at Ian Irving's column in the Financial Post today, talking about how many smokers there are in Canada and how many vapors. The number of smokers has decreased dramatically. The number of vapors is now, 1.3 billion on the last survey, or a million. We're seeing this transition. It's happening regardless of all the things that these people are doing. Consumers are moving, and these people aren't stopping them. It's only a matter of at what point do we stop getting in the way and start facilitating this and saying, could we really get rid of smoking as a public health issue in the next six years if we got serious about it, if we actually worked with consumers rather than fought them.